On the first part of this video, I'm going to be speaking about my evidence for TS5, which is adapting lessons to meet the strengths and needs of all pupils. In terms of my starting point, I'm going to be talking about my delivery of volleyball lessons. Now, although this standard is about differentiation and not subject knowledge specifically, I felt that with my low level of subject knowledge on volleyball anyway, that I would struggle to teach and effectively adapt the lesson if I didn't have a basic grasp of it in the first place. So I rated myself as a level 4, so not sufficient to teach at any standard. My only prior experience of volleyball had been on the initial weeks of my PGCE, and I felt like I would need to upskill myself on both basic techniques and how to differentiate to a class accordingly. So with insufficient knowledge, I felt like I would struggle to not only challenge pupils who were going to be in my Year 11 Set 1 and Set 2 class, but I would also struggle to make pupils feel like they'd been catered for in terms of my delivery. Having done a little bit of research on differentiation, I soon realized that there are multiple ways in which content can be differentiated, not just using the step abbreviations of space, time, equipment, task, and people, but also by doing by diving a little bit deeper into this. I found out a little bit more about how modifying each of those specific principles will then impact the subsequent game. For example, Bunker and Thorpe explained how manipulating space often results in an increase or a decrease in the intensity of the activity. By changing the time, you can exaggerate the performance of a given technique, so you might be able to highlight something specifically that you're working on. Modified equipment, so for example, if you're looking at a volleyball context, this might be a ball that moves slower. In one of my lesson plans, I looked at using a balloon just to make sure all players feel included, with the fact that it travels more slowly, and to integrate lesser able pupils into the learning without necessarily making them feel like they'd been singled out per se. So following research on the topic of differentiation, I'm also aware of other means of differentiation, such as the means by which teachers assess pupils, how students will demonstrate that they've actually learned something, as well as the content in terms of how it's presented and what you expect from students. So I've also begun to appreciate that differentiation can be delivered through outcome, task, resource, or grouping. And interestingly, a reflection that's confirmed by research is that differentiation through outcome, i.e. expecting that pupils will differ in the outcomes they come up with, isn't really differentiation, since it's not really adapting to the strengths and needs of all pupils. It's simply lazy teaching, for want of a better word. And also found out that if your focus is on, say, the tactical execution, then you don't want something like a poor execution of the skill to impede the pupil's ability to actually properly demonstrate your learning objectives. So one thing that I found particularly useful was that teachers may implement a volleyball game in which lower ability students can catch the ball and self-feed, as that's still going to allow pupils to demonstrate games-based strategies which otherwise would be hidden by poor skill execution. So in terms of another action I chose to take, in terms of improving my ability to differentiate, I observed a lesson from another PE teacher within the department, and he used different net heights to account for pupils who struggled to hit the ball over the volleyball net height. So, for example, smaller pupils. I also took from this lesson that he used different balls. So, for example, some of the girls in the class were complaining about the volleyball feeling quite hard on their arms, and just using something like a dodgeball is a very easy way to make pupils feel involved in the lesson and not immediately put them off from the get-go. Also, by changing the rules slightly just so pupils don't get so far behind can also be a nice way of doing this. However, I still felt like there perhaps could have been better ways of doing this that didn't single the pupil out. When we did our FA Level 1 teaching course, they mentioned that obviously in terms of inclusive PE, you want to make sure that pupils who are less able don't necessarily